not going yet, is it?
No, not yet. Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Woo. All right, so fun fact, right before we came on, literally a second before I came on, because, that's how we roll.
Is it frozen?
Yeah, it's frozen. It'll be fine. It'll catch up.
There we go. Is it going to go to Facebook or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going on Facebook. It's got shared out to everybody on there. I think we got a couple people on here already, actually. So, share it out on the Man Bites Media page.
Okay.
Yeah. So, everybody, my name is Louis.
I am Naomi.
And we are Midnight Movie Nerds. And very special to both of us in different ways. You want to give a little bit of the background why we're doing I Love Lucy?
Spoiler.
Well,
in case it's not totally obvious.
Just in case.
So, I Love Lucy happens to be my favorite TV show of all time. I've seen every episode multiple times. I have my Lucy swag, which I'm very proud of. This is Lucy and Desi Arnaz's art autograph, which is one of my prized collector's items. And I just love it because Lucy is my hero, absolutely, positively, on so many levels, because it may be one of those stories that just kind of comes out of Hollywood eventually, but Lucy actually is kind of a scrap dog of Hollywood. And I find that to be very admirable, because when Lucy, she was a successful model of sorts during her time, but when she went to Hollywood and she became a Goldwyn girl, a lot of people who were in the know told Lucy that she would never be a household name that people wanted to watch, which was very true for her Hollywood career, because she was known as the B-movie queen, which is not generally something that leads to notoriety and fame forever. But then she rebranded herself and reemerged in her 40s as an icon in American culture. Yeah, very much so. And now we have I Love Lucy, who is still embedded. That show is still embedded as a part of American pop culture, even today.
Not even pop culture. That is Americana.
She is the symbol of that story of the rags to riches almost in Hollywood, and being able to overcome what are a lot of assumptions about where your success would be in life. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm a really big believer in that. What your current circumstances are don't dictate what you're going to be. So I love Lucy. She is my personal hero, and I just think the show is freaking awesome and holds up even today.
Well, going back to that point that you actually brought up about the 40s, the fact is that most celebrities up to that point, this is golden era Hollywood, 1930s to 1950s. The standard was at 35, women retired from cinema.
Yes.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
Women did not go past 35. And that's why she was actually one of the first artist that actually rebranded herself and made a bigger success after.
She was also, if you think about it, she was also doing this as a working mom, which is a huge part of I Love Lucy, and we will make a point of that later on about the fact that that was a revolution in TV history. There are so many firsts that came out of this show, but also she was the head of a studio. She was the head with Desi Arnaz of Desi Lou Studios, which was a big deal at the time, because she was not a silent partner. She was a full partner, in the studio, glorious. And she was an innovator in television in general. Desi Lou Studios brought a lot of innovative shows, like That Girl, another show that I happened to love of that time, which was the first one to bring a girl depicted alone in an apartment in New York, living on her own and making her way, which is probably reconciling back to Lucy's own start. And then also Lucy had a hand in bringing us Star Trek,
which she's a huge
fan.
I
cannot say enough about the fact that I love this show and I love the impact it's had.
Yeah.
So.
And for me, honestly, the biggest connection is Cuba. My family is Cuban. I was born here in the States, but I grew up. Cuban culture is very much like the Italians, that we grow up with that heritage. My dad used to tell me, how usually you're told bedtime stories and stuff like that, of fables and all that stuff. I heard stories of Cuba. So the fact is that when I was in my teens, I was willing to sacrifice my life if they ever called on a group of people to actually go and try to fight for Cuba. That's how much patriotism I have to a country I've never known. This is the only country I've ever known, and yet I still have this patriotic fervor where when I hear the national anthem of Cuba, a tear goes down my eye. That's how powerful it is. So for me, yes, I wasn't born in Cuba, which my family loves to point out.
He's American. Direct quote from his uncle.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. But no, honestly, it's that emotion that you connect with it because of my father, my grandfather, and everybody else.
But I do think that another huge part of this show, and another reason why it was actually so controversial at the time, is because it was considered a mixed marriage of its time, and the studios were very much against Lucy being on air with Desi because they said that America would never accept a mixed marriage, which, you know, an American and a Cuban, I mean, come on. But they said that his accent would be a deterrent because people wouldn't believe that a wholesome American girl would marry a man from Cuba. And it couldn't be depicted in a way that would ever have sustainability. And that's a huge part of the show. And a huge part of why everyone loves the show is that dynamic between them.
Yeah.
So taking away from the serious a little bit, though, because we got really deep down the rabbit hole there, we decided to bring you the top 10 Lucy episodes. But we decided to take a different spin on it because there are some iconic episodes that everybody seems to know. And we wanted to highlight some of the lesser appreciated, maybe lesser advertised, less seen ones in popular media, save for one that we both just could not leave off the list.
Yeah, exactly. So. Both of us actually always happen to agree on at least one major one.
Yes,
and it's usually our top three, in our top three. So this episode is no exception to that. And honestly, I think that we also wanted to bring a little bit of flavor of Cuban flavor to us.
Yep.
Because, you know, you can't talk about I Love Lucy without food, and it was a major part. So we actually went to a Cuban bakery here in Orlando, so take that as a grain of salt.
It's not Miami.
Obviously saw, and you saw the previous episodes with the what do you call it, batido de mango, and also the colada.
The evil in a cup.
Yes, the evil in a cup, as she calls it, which is crack in a cup for me. But I love that shit, and so does everybody else. But we actually have little guava cookies and pastry, but the biggest thing is arroz con pollo with the sweet plantains, because that is literally the staple of I Love Lucy. You know,
it's the cliched food that every time she was making a Cuban dish, that is what she made. And I think Ricky actually makes it in one episode as well, when he's trying to show that he's got all these great cooking skills. He makes chicken and rice, because I'm not going to try to say it. Chicken and rice.
Se llama arroz con pollo. And
fun fact, when we went to go pick this up, I'm learning Spanish. And I sent him outside because I wanted to practice and not have his judgmental look. And I went to the guy and I was like, hola, ¿cómo está? And he's like, hi, how are you?
That's because we're in Miami. We're in Orlando, not in Miami.
But I think I would have been kind of lost if he had responded in Spanish. I would have been like, I'm out. That's as far as I can go. So let's get into this, though, with a little background about I Love Lucy. It first aired October 15th in 1951.
1951?
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
And it went off the air May 6th, 1957.
So that lasted 6 years.
It got 6 years. It was
6 years of cinema that has made an impact that still stands to this day.
It was a total of 180 episodes, including the Lost pilot, which was released later on.
Yeah.
And it starred Lucille Ball, her husband at the time, Desi Arnaz, and then the two other supporting stars in it were Vivian Vance and William Frawley. And it was written primarily by Jess Oppenheimer, which I'm bringing up just because I am going to reference him later on because he was a huge part of the development of the show. Things that happened later on. And it was also the most watched TV show 4 out of the 6 seasons in the United States.
Wow.
So lots of.
And that's in the 1950s.
Yes. Actually, I read a fun fact that the episode where Lucy gives birth actually had more viewers than Dwight Eisenhower's inauguration.
Well, that's not saying much, but
you know, still, there you go. I mean, come on. Pretty interesting for that time, though. There you go. All right, so you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready?
Let's do this. Shit.
Okay.
What's our top 10? Come on.
Okay, so getting it started was Lucy is Envious. This is an episode where Lucy's old school friend comes into town and asks Lucy for a donation to support her cause. And Lucy originally thinks that she was promising $5, and it was actually $500, and she has no money. And Ricky is trying to understand why she's so envious of this whole thing. But the big part of this episode is the fact that Lucy decides to get a job, a quick publicity stunt, and it ends up being the episode where they were the women from Mars.
Yes, which is fucking great.
Land on the Empire State Building, and it's actually a call to Orson Welles' Invasion, Attack from Mars, famous
War of the Worlds.
The War of the Worlds one that had come out pretty recently, and Orson Welles and her were actually friends.
Yeah.
So, fun fact is she was a very close friend with Orson Welles. He showed up in the show later on. He was actually in an episode.
6. Yeah.
So, it was an ode to that, and it's a fun episode. I picked this one personally because I like the fact that it pushed kind of their normal zone where they are. They were out of their apartment. It was Lucy and Ethel kind of doing what they do best.
On the Empire State Building.
On the Empire State Building.
Which was pretty awesome, honestly. The way they portrayed this was just brilliant. It gave this flavor of what we think of now as like modern comedy sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
And it has that kind of slapstick Three Stooges.
Yes. Come on.
No, and when the husbands find out.
When they're hopping in. I'm like, what is that? But fun fact is that Jess Oppenheimer, the head writer of the show, actually, this was his least favorite episode because he said it was the most unrealistic one they did in the entire run.
Why? Because they did used to do publicity stunts like this in the 50s. They did,
but I think he felt like it was a stretch for the characters. So this was actually his least favorite of all the ones they did, which, he might have loved it, and just this happened to be his least favorite one. But I really like this one. I do get, though, it was extreme. It was going into the paranoia of that time. It really was very off-the-wall sitcom-y for that time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I can see where maybe he'd be like, it wasn't it wasn't grounded in reality. It was all about paranoia and things like that. So.
But also, that kind of gave the way to a lot of shows that actually did this as well in the future. And honestly, that's what this show does a lot of. It actually pushes the envelope, and it pushed it so drastically that a lot of the sitcoms, you could tell the formulaic episodes that we have now are based off of I Love Lucy, and those did not exist before.
Actually, I do remember reading somewhere that Lucy, she was the one that came up with the first one to do the 3-camera filming system, which was huge. It's done all the time now, even today, but she was the one that pioneered that technique. And interestingly enough, Lucy and Ricky, Desi, also insisted that they film on 35 millimeter, which was very unusual for that time because it was very expensive, and they both took pay cuts to cover the cost of the film.
That's amazing.
Because they felt that it was important to preserve the quality of it.
And let me tell you, being a film snob myself, the smell and development of a 35 millimeter is bar none one of the most amazing sensations you could ever do. Handling actual film, not only it pushes the envelope because you have to edit on film, and you have to actually develop all that. It's a lot longer process than TV studios used to do back then. Right. So it's just the fact, and it's a lot harder to develop that, and light, which the lighting in this show is actually really phenomenal, because usually what they did is kind of like 2 or 3 fill lights, because they only use one camera in most, and it was basically on a dolly, and it would just track back and forth. So there's a couple of shots in a couple of the early seasons where you see that tracking of the whole set. Actually,
it's really funny because people like to point out the bloopers of it. They say you can see where it's like goes from room to room and the camera's just going back and forth. And that's what it did. But yeah, but
that was a staple.
They were also finding their way. The first season had some of the most iconic episodes. But it also, you can see it's definitely where they were still finding their footing. And you can see that there isn't as much chemistry as they developed later on between the stars. Because another fun fact for you is the fact that Lucille Ball really didn't like Vivian Vance at the start because she felt that she was going to steal her comedic limelight.
Well, because she is the strongest actress in all the show. She is the only one that could actually hold her own.
Vivian Vance is the consummate straight man, but she was essential to the show. She had amazing comedic timing, and it was actually Desi Arnaz who told Lucy that she had to hire her for the show. Lucy was adamant against it. She actually wanted her friend, Barbara Pepper, I believe her name was, and she actually shows up in a few episodes. Most iconically in the episode where Lucy gives birth, she was the nurse who fainted when she saw Ricky. That was originally who she wanted to play the role of Ethel.
I can't imagine anybody else playing that role.
But Ricky or Desi actually went to Broadway. I think Vivian was on Broadway at that time, and he saw her in a show, and he hired her on the spot because he just knew that she was the right one for the role. The same with William Frawley. Actually, he was the one that hired him with the stipulation that William Frawley could never be late to the set because he was a notorious drunk at that time.
Which you could tell.
The shaking was very notorious during it, and you could see it. But William Frawley actually was never late a day because he said he would be fired immediately if William was ever late. So it's kind of interesting because Desi had a huge part in casting the show, which is a little unusual for that time because
it's usually like a studio exec.
The director, but like I said, Desi Lou was their baby. This was the epitome of that.
So they had the executive producer credit anyways. But also, Fred's character was kind of. It's Vander, what is it called? Vander, what the hell's the name? Vaudevillian?
Vaudevillian? Yeah. Well, but he came from vaudeville. That carries through in his character, and that's a huge part of the show is the fact that they carried a lot of their own personal elements into the show.
And Desi sucks as an actor. Like he really.
You ever see the Golden Girls episode where Sophia says that she's like, Lucy always wants to be in the show. Why didn't he let her? Because his show was terrible. Like Lucy made it interesting. So, all right, moving on to our next episode.
Yes.
Which I think you're gonna feel near and dear. Ricky thinks he's going bald.
Yes. I wanted to include this one on here because honestly, I know how it feels. First of all, second of all, it is perfect for guys. This is something that you could connect with, and that's what this show does well.
Mm-hmm.
This is iconic because this is a connecting episode. This is something that you will find the connection with, and most shows before that time were not meant to do that. They were literally like little phases of comedy, and they were connecting together little skits, basically.
Right.
So they didn't have like a through line or kind of like a moral story, and this one did. It showed like, look, you could still be yourself, even if you're losing your hair. She still loved him, and it kind of gave that.
But there's some love and reminiscence here. But Jess Oppenheimer, again, he wrote this show based on his own experience, and everything that Lucy did during that torture treatment was actually stuff he tried because he was losing his hair. So that came from, and that's probably why this episode is so great, because it came from reality. He was losing his hair. He went to a store and he said, what can I do? And he tried every treatment that Lucy ends up trying on her husband, Ricky, during this episode, including that huge massaging thing.
Yeah.
He tried that. That was actually his. But he brought it because it didn't work.
Hey, dude, let me tell you, they tried some crazy shit back in the day.
But the cool part about this episode actually is that it was actually reformatted after it was filmed, because it originally ended with the bald party. I don't know if you remember that scene where all the bald men. So it's kind of awkward if you can actually feel it, the way the episode's cut together, because it was rigid. That was how it was going to the finale, but Jess felt it wasn't a strong enough finale. It had to end on that torture device.
Yeah.
So that's actually, they recut it after it was done. And that's why it's a little bit choppy as an episode.
That's interesting.
But it is one of the
I can actually see that.
Yeah. So they had to switch it. They inverted the two scenes and it was kind of weird. So but it
works really well.
It works really well, and it's again just the power of that writer and how he just decided that it wasn't strong enough, and they had to recut it afterward, and they didn't accept anything less than what they thought was great. So
yeah,
part of the reason this show is so great, obviously. So
obviously.
So the next one, Lucy does a television commercial. Now, this is our cliched one that everybody seems to know, and if you don't recognize it by the title, it is the Vita Vegeminian one.
This is so great. Seeing Lucy,
it is considered her strongest comedic performance, actually. It is considered her most iconic episode and her true talents as an actress.
Yeah.
Now, what is fun about this episode is the fact that the crew was really, they were searching for something that she could drink a lot of, but would elicit that reaction, that gag reflex. So if you haven't seen the episode, if you lived under a rock,
seriously,
she is drinking a product called Vita Vegeminian, promoting it on a television commercial, and it is 23% alcohol. And they have her reshoot the scene over and over again, and she gets progressively more drunk during it. So they actually picked apple pectin, which I've never had, but they said it's a sickeningly sweet drink. So her gagging was actually real because she was drinking copious amounts of this really sweet, kind of like a cough syrupy sort of thing.
Well, for you, all they needed to get was Cuban coffee, and they would have been good.
So, but that was actually,
they would have been wired.
But so that was actually what she was drinking during it, and it also had the right consistency. So when she's pouring out of the bottle, it does have that cough syrup effect. And actually, really funny is the fact that the original episode, it ends with her drunk and she's wandering around the studio, but they actually had filmed a scene where Ethel came in and brought her Vita Vegeminian to cure her hangover the next day, because she didn't realize that's why she got sick. So that's actually kind of funny, and I think that would have been actually really funny end.
That really would have
to the episode.
That really would have, honestly.
Fun. Also, I don't know if you noticed, Ethel's not in that episode.
Yeah,
the actress was not available at the time, and they just said that she was visiting her mother, so she's not in that episode, which is interesting because it's very rare. No, I think he was for a minute. They don't mention specifically that he wasn't there, but they made a point that Ethel was not featured in that episode. So I find that interesting, though, because it's very rare that a show can carry on with 1/4 of their crew gone. So that was kind of interesting. But it's one of my favorite episodes. I love it because it really does show her comedic timing and talent.
Yeah.
And also her lingual ability.
Yeah.
Vita Vegeminian, girl. I'm your Vita Vegeminian.
It's so great because you think about how were commercials made? And before this, there was no behind the scenes. There was no YouTube. There was none of this stuff that we have now and we take for granted that we could look up. How did they do this commercial? Blooper reels, all that stuff. So this was kind of a blooper reel of a commercial.
Absolutely.
And how they did a commercial. That's just fascinating to see that in the 50s.
It is really cool. And I guess in the original episode, she did do some kind of plugging for how they did do live commercials during it. So basically, they would stop filming and the commercial would be live. And she had done some kind of ad-libbing. They cut it from the final episode, but to William Morrison, because they were a big sponsor of the show.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but you actually, if you see some of the original cuts of the episodes where they had Lucy and Desi would be doing that. They would be doing the promotions and the commercials during it. They'd be talking about like cold cream for the face and hair products for Lucy, things like that. So it wasn't uncommon for the talent to be doing the commercials themselves during the show. Yeah. They were sponsors of it and people were watching for them. So
exactly
different kind of sponsorship that was done.
It's sort of like radio nowadays.
Yeah, a little bit.
What's the next episode?
The next episode is the operetta.
Oh, this is just brilliantly done.
I'm Lily of the Valley. In this episode, we haven't been doing a really good job explaining it. Lucy is a club treasurer and she needs to raise money quickly for her club because she spent all of the club's money on personal stuff.
Which she does all the time.
She was juggling, in her defense, she was juggling between personal finances and club and she kind of dropped the ball is what she says. So she wrote an operetta.
No. She was going, let me borrow from here.
Yes.
And then let me borrow from here. And then let me switch it around and then borrow from here. And then she lost track.
So Lucy writes an opera to star her husband, Ricky, for free. And she wouldn't have to pay royalties then. But she writes everything on the club's checking account when there is no money in it, thinking that they will not cash the check until the day after the operetta. So during the show, the people come to repossess all of the stuff.
In the middle of the show.
In the middle of the show. It bounced. It was post-dated. I love it. This episode is so underappreciated. And I think it's just one of those fun episodes. You know, they got the full-on cast on there. It shows Vivian Vance's talent as a singer during it, actually, because Lucy has to begrudgingly give her the lead role of Lily of the Valley while she plays the Snaggletooth witch, Camille, or something like that.
Which is very fitting to what actually I Love Lucy is.
It is very much so. But it's a really funny episode because it's one of those rare ones where they had more than the 4 primary people in there. And it's funny, it's lighthearted, and you know, it really gets in the depth of Lucy's character, though. The fact that she mismanages money. Ricky always ends up having to save them somehow. Yeah. You know. So
full disclosure, guys, I rewatched I Love Lucy basically while I was working the last 2 weeks. Oh. So full disclosure, I left that job now, so I could actually disclose this without any repercussions. But this episode, I had to stop watching it while I was working because I got so distracted that I couldn't actually concentrate. And I told her this a million times. I'm like, I can't watch this show when I'm working because I stop and I start looking at the screen. And this was one of those episodes I had to watch it 3 times. And I loved it all 3 times that I watched it.
I love this episode. It doesn't get old for me. It's always funny every time. And I love the fact that, you know, especially Ricky's reaction when we sing the songs.
Oh my God, they're so great.
It's just great. And it's barely, it was at the peak, I think, of their dynamic, of their marriage when they wanted to be together. And just the show really hit its stride at this point.
It really did. It really, really did. So what's the next one?
Off to Florida. I love this episode because one of my favorite scenes in any Lucy episode is in this episode is when the tire goes flat. Lucy stands up, she starts kicking the tire, and then she says, Mia, she starts trying to scream in Spanish, which I don't remember what she says, but I was like, what are you doing? She's like, this is what the men do. They kick the tire. This is a very important part of this whole process. I love it. I think it's hilarious.
She's been in the car with me. And she knows road rage from a Cuban how it is.
So this episode is Lucy convinced Ricky that they should go to Florida together. The girls are driving down there separate because the boys went down early for a fishing trip.
Yes.
So they ended up going down separate, but Lucy lost the train tickets. And they had to hitchhike to get a ride, basically. They arranged a ride with a woman who they think is a serial killer. So the whole thing is their road trip from New York to Florida with who they think is a serial killer, and the woman thinks actually they are serial killers.
Yeah.
So it's a really funny episode, and it's just this dynamic between this old stodgy lady and Lucy and Ethel, and this paranoia that they're trying to kill each other. And it's really it's a cool episode. It's a travel episode, which they did a lot later on in the latter part of the series. They traveled to Hollywood. They did a road trip.
They did a really good job with the travel, honestly, because usually back then it was like, you do a backdrop and you project on the backdrop the scenery and all that stuff. And this actually looked legit. It didn't look like rear projection. So I'm wondering how they did it. I'm actually interested in
I will say this one kind of ruined a couple episodes for me where he's like, look, it's a picture that's like a foot away from them because you can see the wrinkles in it. I'm like, dude, Seriously, but this episode is really, really funny. I love.
That was the golf one.
Yes,
that was the
golf
the
one. But
club.
this one, I love it a lot because again, it's got that travel element. Like I said, they did that a lot. They went to Hollywood, they went to Europe, and they went to Florida in the last 3 seasons. That's a lot of travel around for the show, even though it was all shot in Hollywood during the time. But still, I guess they were kind of trying to mix it up away from the New York location, put them in a new locale, and you can have new misadventures. So I thought this one was a really funny episode.
I thought so too. This is definitely one of the ones that I remember the most.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't revisited I Love Lucy in about 15 years. So it was a huge refresher. And this is one of the episodes that I clearly remember.
So what's
especially that kick.
What is this?
It's a pastelito.
Oh, I love how you say it in Spanish. Like that clarifies it for me.
It's like a glazing, and it's kind of like pastry. It's a pastry.
Why don't you talk about our next episode, which is The Black Eye?
The Black Eye. Okay, this episode was basically how a lot of situational comedies, like How I Met Your Mother and Friends and all that stuff, kind of use this formula that they use for The Black Eye on various episodes. Pretty much most of their episodes, honestly.
How do you figure?
Because it had like, all right, so the whole thing was basically Ricky was like, or Lucy was, nobody ever believes why you get a black eye. They will never believe the story because people make up whatever they feel like. And that's kind of the stereotype. So she decides to tell the story of, and this was that season where Lucy was already pregnant. So they were actually backtracking a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And pre-recorded episodes. And it was a flashback episode up to that one time that Ricky got a black eye.
It was Lucy.
Lucy got a black eye. And
the Mercedes thought that Ricky had hit Lucy, which would not have been unknown for the time. Not talking that domestic violence was so much higher, but it was more commonly accepted. And because Ricky is known for a hot-blooded Cuban temper, it was the Merches assumed when they heard them fighting that he had punched Lucy, and actually he had thrown a book just in her direction for her to read later on, and she got hit in the eye with it.
Which has an amazing payoff at the end, by the way.
So I really like this episode, and I liked a lot of actually the flashback episodes they did when she was pregnant. Basically what it was is Lucy gave birth, and so they had pre-recorded a bunch of episodes. You don't see very many where she's heavily pregnant, even though they do have an episode where she's going to the hospital. Yeah. But she obviously had cut back on her working schedule, so they were doing a lot of these like flashback like memories of times with Lucy. It was kind of a weird.
It really was
during season 2 because a lot of them start with Lucy's in the hospital and they're like, "Oh, do you remember that time Lucy did this? Do you remember the time you did that?" It's kind of weird and awkward all the way through it.
It is, and when I first started going through it, I was like, "What the hell is this about flashbacks? Why are we going into flashbacks?" It sort of felt
like like they didn't have those episodes that you hate in a season now where it's like. They shoot the beginning of an episode and the end, and then they put up like back memories.
Yeah.
Those episodes you hate, and you're like, why did you do this? Did you get paid $1 million for this? I hated every season of Friends where they did that episode where it was like they shot 2 minutes at the beginning, and then it's like 20 minutes of flashbacks of other episodes. The
Christmas specials and shit like that.
And that's kind of what it felt like to
specials. Me. But this one, it did it well. Like this whole season was actually well structured. The way they did it, it was kind of wonky the way they introduced the episodes, which. They really didn't need to introduce the episodes.
They didn't. I think they could have just filmed them and just let it go.
Let it go. But
I think they were trying to explain why Lucy she was still in the hospital and all that. So it's kind of like
they wanted to make
thing,
that first. They wanted to be that first of like having a pregnant woman actually on film itself. Mm-hmm. So I think they were going for that kind of shock value of that. Because they probably got notoriety for that and probably got a lot of publicity for doing that.
They did, but they had a lot of pushback. For one, showing Lucy as pregnant, which they never refer to her as pregnant. Was expecting or inscient is actually what the episode is called, inscient, because they weren't allowed to say pregnant. And you don't hear it all the way through there, actually. She's always expecting little mom to be. You never hear them actually refer to her as pregnant because, and I was just reading this actually separate article, but kind of related to the fact that in the 1950s, it was still kind of taboo to flaunt your pregnancy. And you can see it in how she wears her clothing, too. She is trying to make it as discreet as possible.
Yep.
So, anyway, next episode.
Yes.
Ricky and Fred are TV fans.
Yes, I wanted to throw this episode. This was one of my choices for sure.
Yes.
Because honestly, I love this. This is guys have the tendency of when they're watching TV, they're watching TV. It's kind of a thing that each gender has their own little nuances, and males have a tendency of hyper focusing on one thing. When females kind of have like what we were talking about the boxes.
Yeah.
The brains. What comedian was it that says that?
I don't remember his name, but it's a comedian who has a theory that men's brains are arranged like boxes. The boxes can't touch. They can only be in one box at a time. Whereas women are a big ball of wire.
And it's all over the place.
And it's all over the place, and it's all charged by emotion and all that. So, and we talk about that all the time, but this episode is the boys want to watch a fight. Between Billy the whatever and like the kid and the warrior whatever, and the girls are sick of it because it's Ricky's one night off during the week and they want to go out and have fun, and the boys don't want to. They want to watch the fight. So the girls end up deciding they're going to find a way to stop them watching it. First they try to block the TV and they get yelled at. Then they decide they're going to go out and get them to they're going to answer the phone, and that'll kind of distract them. Nothing works, and the girls end up actually getting arrested through their trials and tribulations, which is so on par for
because
Lucy
they're trying to cut
wire.
They're trying to cut the actual cable wire, but when they get stopped, they go, "Oh, you're just trying to cut the power so you could steal things." And they're like, "No, we don't. Look, this is the wire that we're going to cut." And then they cut the power, which sets off the whole series of events.
And I really actually love this episode because there's one actor that appears frequently throughout the series. He's always a different character. He was a police officer in this one. I'm going to look up the name. He was Freddie Fillmore in a couple of episodes. He was the train conductor when they were coming back from Hollywood. So he shows up all over the place. And he was when they moved to the country, he was their regular neighbor, which I'm going to try to figure out what his name was. But I really like this actor. And he's it's one of those cool things in TV history back then, I guess, where it's like the same person would come back multiple times, but as a completely different character with no recollection of who he is.
And they do that a lot, especially in TV. I mean, even Doctor Who has done it in modern. Capaldi was in Fires of Pompeii, and then he becomes the Doctor.
Frank Nelson was his name.
Frank Nelson, yes. So,
I mean, and he was just a phenomenal character actor.
He was good.
He always embodied the role so much. I actually really love him because he shows up in another episode that we're going to talk about in just a minute, actually, the next episode, which is $1 Million Idea.
Yes.
And I love this episode. It is probably in my top 3. It is Lucy, once again, needs money because she wrote a check, and she wrote on the check, "Dear Teller, be a lamb," which is where I got that from. I call men lambs because of this episode. She said, "Dear Teller, be a lamb and don't cash us till next month." And the teller gives it to Ricky. So basically, Fred had been talking about how Lucy makes an amazing salad dressing and she should bottle it. And the girls decide they're going to go into business by making a salad dressing called Aunt Martha's Old Fashioned Salad Dressing.
But one thing they forgot to do is actually cover how much their overhead costs would be, which is a staple of I Love Lucy and Lucy's character.
One of my favorite things is actually they go on TV to promote it on Freddie's show, which I forget. He always had a different show name, but on the show. And they're 2 really great iconic scenes. And I think they're the epitome of their relationship. The first one is Lucy coming on to the show as someone McGillicuddy, her maiden name. Yeah. And Ethel is a homemaker who is promoting the product, and she's going, "This is great. This is amazing. Buy it. I'm going to eat the whole thing." They get hundreds of orders the next day, and they decide to go on the show the next day and unsell it because once Ricky tells them that they are in the negative for every bottle, they decide that if they go on the show and unsell it, they're going to do better. So she comes on all like messed up and like blacked out teeth and everything, and she's like, "Don't buy it. Don't buy it."
And then they love the gimmick. They love the gimmick so much that she gets
even more orders, another rush of it. So.
And the payoff at the end is just this glorious, massive household full of bottles.
But I think the funny part is that basically they went to the store, they bought a bunch of salad dressing, put their own label on it, and sent it out as the American way of solving this problem. So I love this episode. I think it's hilarious. I think it's another one of those episodes where it took it to the basic idea, took it to the extreme, but allowed them to really utilize their physical comedy, the sarcasm, things like that. It combines it all, and I love it.
And Lucy does a lot of physical comedy in this.
Lucy is one of those actresses that a huge part of Lucy's complex was she wanted to be the most beautiful. She wanted to always be the most vivacious and the funniest on the show, but she didn't mind playing the extreme too.
She does the extreme better than anything else.
And I think that was this episode shows that. Like it shows a lot of her comedic talent.
I mean, come on. What do we remember of I Love Lucy? In Rat Race, what is the main thing that happens with the Lucys when they do? Is that crying, that thing. Yeah. That physical comedy that she did. That's what we remember her as. She is very much like the slapstick comedy era, and she does it well.
But actually, during an interview later on, Desi Arnaz said that they always had to film in front of a live audience because Lucy played better to a live audience. She responded to the live audience and how they were reacting because she could tell if a joke was falling flat. And that was a huge part of this show is the fact that it always had 300 people in the audience watching them. And most of the clips are filmed in one take, even if they messed up. And that shows their training as a stage actor too, though.
Yeah.
Where nowadays they would recut it, but you can actually see a lot of scenes where they'll trip over words, things like that. And they left it in. They didn't reshoot the scene because that was more real. And it actually was funnier. And bonus fact is the fact that Desi Arnaz actually only needed to read the script once and he had it totally memorized. He was known for a fabulous eidetic memory almost.
Wow.
He only read it once.
I'm wondering how many words of those were things that he put in there because he couldn't.
I feel like it was, or like, sometimes maybe it's like mutter in Spanish. Like maybe he kind of took it and ran with it. But on the flip side, William Frawley was notorious for not being able to memorize his lines and would end up screaming and fighting and ripping up the script at times because he just couldn't deal with it. And part of it was due to his alcoholism and his different problems. But,
I mean, that we know now alcohol.
But it is pretty cool
causes dementia,
that you can see it in those scenes, especially the ones where you can see where they kind of played through a mistake or an error like that. But I do think it's part of that training that they had. They were all stage actors at some point, so they were all able to kind of deal with that, and they played off the audience that way.
That's amazing because I hate laugh tracks. That's one of the things that pisses me off about sitcoms.
Have you ever noticed when you're watching the episodes that there's the frequency, the sound from the audience where they say, "Uh-oh," that one person? That was Lucy's mom, who was at every taping. And the director loved it, "Uh-oh," so much that he just would throw it back in. So it was a recorded part of it. That's why it always sounds the same. But that was actually her mom's voice. And you can actually hear Desi Arnaz because there were a lot of times where he would be watching from the side and you can hear his laugh in the track because he was off to the side and he actually thought it was really funny and he would just start laughing and you can hear him over everyone else because he was so close to the camera too because he was notably closer. But you can hear it. Actually, you can identify his laugh in the track.
Huh. That's interesting.
You'll hear it next time. You won't be able to unhear it now.
Yeah, now I can't unhear it. But I mean, that's amazing though that they were able to feed off of each other and that the comedy was actually real.
It was. And I think they did say there were a couple times where it did trip them up where like they would drop something or do something unexpected and they would just have to kind of recoup from that because they were professionals. They didn't stop. And that was the great part. They didn't stop the cameras and that was some of the greatest moments that they had. So I always just thought that was a really cool thing because you don't see a lot of that now.
No, you
really don't now.
And the fact that honestly the quality is very consistent with their show. Each episode is quality material. You can
see it. It almost feels like a stage production that happens to be filmed, but not in a cheesy overacting way. But just so you can feel that vibe of it.
Except Desi. Desi is a little bit of an overactor.
He is, but I think that's part of his character. That is part of the charm of his character.
I guess
he has very little going for him, so you got to give him his overacting.
So what's the next episode?
The next episode is the diner. No, second to last. The diner.
I love this.
So
talk about overacting.
A recurring theme throughout the show is the fact that Desi wants to get out of show business for something more stable. And this episode is one of those many schemes that they go into where they buy a diner from a man who says that it is the most popular diner in the corner. And they're going to use Desi's good name. That's a huge part of this episode. Desi's name is going to be the one, Ricky's name is going to be the one that's going to bring in all the people. And Fred and Ethel will be in the back cooking. So
Fred and Ethel did not enjoy that.
They did not enjoy this at all, that they were being treated like servants by the Ricardos.
Also, it didn't help that they both sucked at taking orders.
They really did. So they opened up this diner, and it was kind of mismanaged by the Ricardos, the Mertzes. Yes, I was thinking about their last name. They were in the back, and they rebelled, and they decided that they wanted to be out front, and they wanted to share the work evenly. So in typical Mertz Ricardo fashion, they split the diner in half because they both own half and neither can buy the other one out. And they change it to a little taste of Havana, right?
A little taste of Cuba.
And then a big hunk of America. And they're basically serving the same food, basically. But they divide the diner in half, but no one comes in except for one customer, a drunk man who wants a hamburger.
Which, there's no hamburgers. There is pies. There's many
But they go through a bidding war, which I think is great. And I think it's so reminiscent of the time of the pricing, which is what I love. They had 15-cent hamburgers, and they got progressively down until Lucy finally tricks Ethel into saying that they're 1-cent hamburgers and gives the guy $1 and he's like, I want 100 hamburgers. So it's a really funny episode. Again, it's very much physical comedy because they do get into a pie fighting contest or competition or something like that towards the end. And And
then the owner comes back and we find out that it was all ploy. How he makes his money is he sells it to people and then buys it back super cheap.
Exactly.
So he made what, $2,000 off the deal?
It did, yeah, because they buy it back they sell it back at a loss to them basically. But it's a funny episode. It's just one of those, again, it shows the dynamic of the four of them. And I think the strongest episodes are where it's the four of them really playing off of each other. You know,
and that plays into our last one.
Paris at Last.
Yes.
Paris at Last. Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, who didn't watch the whole track of Lucy, is they did end up going on a European tour with Ricky's band, and they go to Switzerland, they go to France, they go to Italy. The most iconic episode of this part of the show was Lucy going to a vineyard in Italy, and she's doing the grape stomping, which, fun fact about that episode really quick, is that Lucy, the professional actress she actually started to choke on a grape mid-shot, but didn't want to break the scene. So she just was choking during it, and it wasn't until after they cut that she finally was like gagging, and they had to go get the grape out of her throat because she was choking during most of that scene.
Damn, I didn't know that.
But she was a professional, and she wasn't going to stop, and she knew they'd hit their thing with the scene. So like I said, they didn't usually cut. Once they started, they didn't cut. So, and that's a very iconic scene. It is one of the most famous, but we picked Paris at Last for a very, it's another iconic scene. It has been ripped on several times since then.
Several.
And it is, Lucy ends up getting counterfeit money because she's wandering around Paris on her own. She doesn't really know what's happening. And a guy offers to give her money instead of trading at American Express because he says he has no overhead, so he can give her a better exchange rate.
Yeah.
Lucy she gets caught for counterfeiting after she goes through the snail scene. She's in a restaurant. She wants some ketchup on her snail.
Oh my God. That's
but, she ends up in jail, and she calls Ricky, and the whole thing is that the sergeant speaks French, the lieutenant or whatever, he speaks French and German. Another prisoner there speaks German and Spanish, and then Ricky speaks Spanish and English. So they translate back and forth between Lucy down to it.
It's a telephone train.
And it's been ripped on. There's so many scenes in Lucy that have been ripped on so many times, but this is an iconic one where they have to translate back and forth.
I think there's a movie of Inspector Clouseau.
Yeah, where they have to translate back and forth across the line. And it's really funny because they match the inflections of each man as they're going back and forth, and they match Lucy's as well, where she's like, I am innocent. And he's like, you're so innocent. And like they go all the way through it. And it's really cool to see.
Spanish.
There you go. See, but it's a really, really cool. It's a cool scene. It shows, I think, the fact that they were so innovative in their approach. They invented a lot of the comedy things that are still used today, and this episode is a perfect example of it.
Even the structures. I mean, I'm gonna go red in the face saying that this was one of the most innovative shows I've ever seen, and especially when you look back that this was 1950s. This is 1950s. This show feels like a 70s, 80s show.
But it's got staying power. That's the thing. It's still funny today, and it could still be used today. A lot of the things they did then could still be used today,
and it still holds up. Like besides, obviously, the monetary exchange that's changed. Obviously, we don't have hamburgers or 10 cents anymore.
I know, right? I'd be in paradise. Do you remember when McDonald's did that for a bit?
Yeah.
They used to do like the 25-cent hamburger. My dad would buy this huge ass bag. He'd be like, give me 25 of those things. We'll leave them in the car. We'll leave them at home for days. We're good.
And the bucket of fries for $2.
Right? Exactly.
Oh my God.
Tangent. Sorry. Anyway, so innovative show. Obviously, it is very much of its time. It references a lot of things that would not fly today. It does reference spousal abuse, even though it is never depicted in the show. That is very important. It was never depicted, save for one episode where he was shown spanking her on the butt, but it was
a couple episodes.
But he was never shown actually like hitting her in the face or anything like that. It was always it was more playful spanking on the butt more than anything else. But it did reference the fact that he had a violent temper. She does say a few times that he had never hit her. He yells a lot, which was very tolerated during that time. But but I can't think of anything else that really wouldn't fly
but that's
today.
The thing,
you know
though.
What I mean? Like
Hispanics yelling to Americans is like it's like a casual.
But I think those are the things where maybe that probably wouldn't fly in an episode today. But I mean, it innovated a lot. Being able to be showing a pregnant woman on TV.
Yeah.
A woman working. Because Lucy did. And actually, this one thing that I do want to bring up is the fact that this show, actually, although this was created to bring their marriage together and bring strength to it so they could spend time together, it did end up ultimately leading to their divorce as well, which you can see through the show. And I actually showed him a later episode to make that point, because I think it's important to bring up the fact that you can see the transition of their marriage at the show. It starts out very lovey-dovey. They're very close. They're very bonded. They have very good chemistry with each other. And by the end, it is volatile. Yeah. Like by those last seasons, which was transitioned to the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour, They were hour-long
Yeah.
episodes. They were in the country. They had a lot of guest stars. That's when they really upped they had guest stars. Lucy was getting discontent with being in the country. She wanted to work full-time. There's actually an episode where she does get a job full-time, and it really puts a strain on their marriage. But you can see it also. You can see it in their personal life. And Lucille Ball actually did serve Desi Arnaz with divorce papers at the end of the final shooting. So
And you could tell the chemistry was falling apart.
You can see it. And I think that's an important part of the show, though, because this show was built on they were America's favorite beloved couple. And you see the demise of their marriage throughout it. Partly it was because of Desi's behavior. He did commit adultery several times. But they just had a strained relationship, and they kind of grew apart, actually. So the show actually did the opposite of what they had hoped it would do.
And also, you could expect that when they're doing a show like this, that's putting them in the limelight the way that it did.
It did.
Honestly, the limelight isn't for everybody. And unfortunately, like with them, I think that they didn't have anything to stand on beforehand. Yeah. And because of that...
They had a strained marriage beforehand. This was meant to be a Band-Aid, and it worked for a little bit. It didn't work long-term, though, but Lucy did. After this, she came back and made several shows. None of them were as popular. No. She did come back and do a show with Vivian Vance, though. The Lucy show, I believe she did a few.
Yeah, but that thing was horrible. I watched one episode.
The dynamic changed. There was a magic chemistry to this show that really couldn't be replicated. And Lucy, definitely. Honestly, was not strong enough as an actress to carry a show on her own without the other three supports, especially Vivian Vance, who did become one of her best friends later on, despite their initial not liking each other so much. But Vivian, actually, when she came back, she said that she wouldn't be depicted as dumpy or overweight anymore.
Exactly.
So she grew a little bit of a backbone because she knew that Lucy needed her, essentially.
Also, she had that backing now.
So, it's kind of bringing us back, rounding us out. You know, Lucy, it's the iconic show of the 50s. I think when you think of 1950s television, you think of shows like, you think of Dick Van Dyke, you think of, but you think of Lucy, Mary Tyler Moore. It's that Nick at Night. I grew up watching this at Nick at Night.
Yep.
Every night.
Same.
I watched every episode. I've watched it multiple times, like I said, and I think it holds today. People still know Lucy. They recognize it. And she's one of those things. She's almost a brand in herself. Like you show like the McDonald's logo, you show Burger King logo, Coca-Cola, you show a picture of Lucy. Everyone knows it.
No matter what country you go, no matter which way you look, she has become Americana.
She is.
American
She is the symbol. And you know what? Their life and their dynamic is the symbol of America. To a lot of people, they still think that's how it is. And in a lot of ways it is. It did, because it dealt with a lot of issues that are still in a marriage today. I just made him watch, even though we didn't reference it, the episode where they're in Palm Springs, and it's talking about how you drive each other crazy in marriage,
with
basically.
Little ticks. Yeah.
Ticks. But they still apply today.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much. So
I think it set the pace a lot for modern sitcoms. If we didn't have shows like this that innovated the kind of stodgy, kind of like sterile shows that were in existence in the 50s, at the beginning of the 50s.
It took away from that. Okay, so like that Pleasantville vibe.
Yeah.
Where everything's good and everything's happy and there's
this changed that dynamic
discord.
A lot.
This took it to that next level where you could
and
have
sarcasm.
conflict. Yeah, you could have that. And it's really, it was to me, it is the beginning of what turned into American sitcoms.
And not only that, it finally portrayed women with respect. They weren't just
a housewife anymore.
Exactly.
You could be more than that. And
she was sarcastic to Ricky
leads
constantly.
the way to things like Mary Tyler Moore and That Girl and things like that. Shows that where women were working and they were active and they had more than just that element in their life. And they didn't just, being a wife and mom was not enough, which is actually really groundbreaking for its time.
Oh, big time.
Because she was a housewife, but she wanted to work. She was very ambitious. It is a huge part of the show is the fact that she wanted to be in show business. She sucked at it, but she wanted to be a part of it. And I think that's why it just stands up there as my favorite show and she's my hero because of that.
Yeah. I definitely have grown to respect her more because of the stories that Naomi has told me. Because honestly, my knowledge and trivial knowledge of I Love Lucy was to the extent of the show, and that's it. I didn't know all the things about Lucille Ball afterwards and everything. And honestly, it is an inspiration, the fact that she did what she did. And she did what she did. It wasn't like, oh, the man was behind the scenes doing everything and she was using that man as a puppet. No, she did it.
She did.
Her
she
name
really
was
did.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's incredible because women, even to today's standard, J.K. Rowling, why did she change her name? Because she didn't think that she could get published as a woman. And this is 1990s.
Yeah.
1990s. And she didn't think that she did that. Yet Lucille Ball did it in the 1950s, 15 years after suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. And the fact that she owned a studio, she was a studio head.
Mm-hmm.
That is mind-boggling how fucking great that is.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that forget it. That stands on its own as an incredible feat. And definitely that's why when Naomi brought up the fact that we should do this, I was like, yes, let's do this.
Absolutely.
Especially because I'm Cuban too.
There you go. It's our dynamic. He's my Ricky.
Well, without the abuse and screaming, you know?
I don't know. You slip into Spanish when you get angry. I don't know all the dirty Spanish words.
But thank you guys so much for joining us. Did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up or no?
I don't think so, no.
No? All right. So my name is Louis.
I'm Naomi.
And we are Midnight Movie Nerds. And this is the I Love Lucy and Cuba edition.